Hello. As Games Workshop has grown over the past 40 years, there have been an enormous number of jobs that we just don't hear about. Beyond the artists and the designers, the writers and the sculptors, there are huge numbers of people who do the day-to-day things that keep the wheels turning. My guest today is just one such individual responsible for many of those roles, working in the Games Workshop head office through the 80s and 90s. He was responsible for writing and publishing Black Sun, the newsletter. He posed for various pieces of art by Dave Gallagher and John Blanche. And he even worked as the assistant art director, responsible for managing and commissioning the briefs for new pieces of art. In more recent times, he's become something of a guardian of Games Workshop history and artworks, with a huge number of original pieces in his collection. And he's become a guardian for the city of Nottingham as well, as their official Robin Hood for the past 30 years. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with the marvellous Tim Pollard. Tim, thank you for joining me. I'm keen to start with just a little bit of an exploration of where you started in the hobby and sort of wargaming in general.
Way back. Back in the early 70s. Big Lord of the Rings fan, as you know, a lot of people were at the time. And a guy at school said, "Did you know you could get figures of Lord of the Rings miniatures?" I was very excited. He said, "I've got a list of them. If you give me 5p, I'll bring this list in." Turns out he was actually cutting up one of his brother's military modelling magazines or something. Bought in the list of the minifigs ME range, which was one of the first fantasy ranges to come out. And I became obsessed with it. I collected them. I must admit, have a lot of unpainted minifigs ME figures in my pile of shame, which goes back decades.
So there's actual 70s miniatures in there waiting to be painted.
Oh God, yes. I've got a lot of unpainted miniatures.
Sure.
To be fair, if everything goes bad in the world, I can hide behind a pile of lead that will keep me safe from almost anything. So I started getting into Middle Earth gaming, and it was the time, of course, when lots of people, it was mainly sort of Napoleonics, colonials, and ancients. When people were, I've talked with, I think Rick Priestley might have talked about his experiences of making elephants, for instance. You couldn't get model elephant, so you bought your Britain's plastic elephant, you made a cardboard howdah out of it. You were altering people with, shields made from drawing pins. You were using plasticine and covering it in a foul stuff called banana oil, which kind of set it because it was pre-milliput days, and so it was really sort of hands-on. Right. And it was great. I really loved it. From there, I went to because I got excited by the hobby. I got excited. I got to join the staff of the Nottingham Model Soldier Shop, which sadly long gone, started by a guy called John Walker near the Theatre Royal. That was my first Saturday job, basically. And this was before blister packs. It was before even putting miniatures in plastic bags. There were little drawers that you'd have to pull out, have a look at the individual miniatures and so on. Right. Cheap. They were cheap then. And it was there that I met some of the guys from Asgard, and this is where it kind of really started to grow. So Asgard miniatures, basically, it's kind of the root of, Bryan Ansell was there, a guy called Paul Sully, but Nick Bibby was a sculptor, very, still is very famous sculptor. Jez Goodwin was there. Other people who are around, Gary Parsons, Slim, was a great sort of caster, and there was a group of us. Alan Merritt used to turn up a lot. Andy Chambers used to turn up a lot, and we socialised, we gamed, we played games like Combat 3000, which was again a kind of precursor to 40k. We played Laserburn, which obviously was.
Mm.
And indeed, my sadly departed friends Andrew Shupankevich Pank helped write some of the rules for that, and he then went on to. He was working at Games Workshop and went on to write the Blood on the Streets Warhammer pack. So there was this already. There was this sort of frothing creativity, and it was Slim Gary Parsons who got me to go to work at Newark with Citadel when Citadel was at Newark. So this is really back in the days, and I was doing things like helping pack figures and stuff. I was quite young at the time, having fun with that. I tried doing a bit of design work, did a bit of sculpting in early Milliput, which I showed to Bryan, and Bryan nodded then turned away, and that was the end of my sculpting career. It was great. There were a whole load of us working playing games together, and again it was back in those really creative days. So we're playing skirmish sci-fi stuff with any figures that came that came to mind. Hinchcliffe sci-fi and Asgard sci-fi, obviously, and just really getting into it. And from that, I got offered a job as a mail order troll at Citadel in Eastwood, which was fun. It was good, answering the phones to people. And it was back in the day when people would ring up and you get to know the customers. Right. And you get to, form a relationship with them, and they would ask you, what's great, what's come out recently. Because of course figures are being produced at this time and there's no internet. So you have to wait to see adverts, to see photos. And people would just ring up and go, well, what's good? I've got, and again, it's not, I've got £3 to spend. And these days, of course, you can get a leg from a model. But back in the day, we've got, I've got a bit of money to spend. What do you recommend? And it was lovely. The feeling that you had of knowing your customers and being able to talk to them, have a chat with them and stuff. And it was very inclusive, I think, which was great. Because I was doing the stuff at I was working with great bunch of people and stuff, big warehouse, and it was very strange. It was kind of divided into areas. There was a sort of office area, there was a packing area, a casting area, and the mail order area, and there was a weird discrepancy between the kind of gamer people, a lot of us who are working in mail order, and the warehouse staff, who tended to be less gamery and perhaps in some cases a bit more dismissive of what we were. Because mostly, Eastwood folks, and not that there's anything wrong with people from Eastwood, but some of the people were very, it's just all a bit nonsense, isn't it? And I paraphrase the word nonsense.
Sure.
Quite down to earth, I think, is the there was one brilliant time when it was 1st of April, weirdly, and one of the guys, Colin, forklift truck driver, came in and went, "I've totaled your car, mate." Have you now, Colin? And he went, "Yeah, drove a forklift into it." Oh, yeah, brilliant. April the 1st. Well done, Colin. Thank you. No, really, I've totaled your car. And he wouldn't let go of this. And I'm like, this guy's just, really forcing this issue. Just okay. I get the gag. Stop it now. Turned out he had totaled my car, driving the forklift right into it, pushed it right out into Tewton Street, and I really should have believed him earlier on.
So were you still playing a lot of games at that time then? You spent a lot of time like using the miniatures that you were sort of packing and working with?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the games that we were playing socially and stuff didn't tend to be, exclusively Citadel Workshop games.
Sure.
I was absolutely in love with a samurai role-playing game called Bushido.
Right.
Second edition Phoenix Games, absolutely adore it. I bought, I'd got the white box D&D stuff. I've got D&D and AD&D and stuff, because this was, of course, a time when Workshop was selling other people's stuff as well, so they had stocks of other games in. But yeah, we were playing Delta Force, for instance, was one of the games we used to play, which is essentially a special forces game, where we still, apparently, somewhere out in the ether, our characters are kneeling at the foot of an aeroplane, waiting to breach it, because we kind of stopped at one point and never took it up again. So these poor characters are waiting for the go word, and they've been there for 40 years. So we were playing lots of different games. We had a Chivalry and Sorcery, for instance. We were playing even Tunnels and Trolls. I used to play quite a lot solo. Steve Jackson games like Ogre,
Right.
which is still going strong. Great game. So basically a lot of stuff that turned up. And when we were playing D&D, we were using not only homegrown campaigns, but the old Judges Guild, who used to produce a lot of games for backgrounds for D&D. So we used to have fun with a lot of those. And Call of Cthulhu. We got into Call of Cthulhu when it first came in. Asgard Miniatures got the first Call of Cthulhu, first edition, first shipment that came into the country, which sat on the shelves for ages with people just going, what? Because people didn't get their heads around it. And a lot of people hadn't heard of, it's difficult to comprehend now, but people hadn't heard of Cthulhu. They hadn't heard of the Lovecraft mythos.
Sure.
And the great thing was when I finally went, I'll give it a go then, and took it home and had a look at it. I'm like, this is so different. This is brilliant. And you can see where all the stuff that that becomes 40k and chaos. Lovecraft comes into it. Obviously, things like Starship Troopers and Dune, come into it, and it's just that melting pot, which is great, with ideas going. We like the idea of power armor. Power armor is brilliant. Reading the Forever War, Joe Haldeman, which has some brilliant descriptions of power armor in it, as well as Starship Troopers. And all this stuff, the Lovecraft and sci-fi and stuff comes together, and you start to see this beginning of what eventually becomes 40k, because it was when I was still at Eastwood, I think, that the first Beaky Marine came out. Right. Searches round, where's Beaky Marine? I've got Beaky Marine here. So let's just see if I can. I don't know if that's going to be in focus or not, but that's one of the first. I'm very lucky to have quite a lot of stuff from the studio from back in the day and stuff. And this is one of the first Marines. And it was one of the first chapters that was painted up for photography for marketing and stuff. So
that's one of the ones that would be in White Dwarf, might be in.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've got so again with conversions and stuff. These are the original Blood Angels. The original Blood Angels. Right. I've got the squad of those, and indeed a lesser known chapter these days, the Silver Skulls, which were also again converted a lot. This is back to the original. So that's the leader. This is a Beaky Marine, but he had his head removed, and it's got a sort of bald head with a breathing mask on.
Right.
I'll drop you some photos down, and maybe you can watch them in.
Of course, yeah, that's great.
Sorcery. Yeah. So and from when I was at Eastwood, I got into producing a magazine called Black Sun.
Right.
Black Sun, I loved. It had initially been started back when White Dwarf was down in London by the great Mark Gascoigne. And essentially, it was a magazine to go inside subscriber copies of White Dwarf. And that had obviously, when Workshop moved up to Nottingham, that had kind of stopped. So I was asked if I'd like to take that up. And basically involved me taking one of the really old green screen Amstrad word processors with a daisy wheel printer back to where I was living at the time, and writing it on my own and finding any odd illustrations that I'd done at the time to put in it. And it was kind of marketing, and it was kind of to form a community. Had to be a couple of pages of adverts in, but at the same time we were running competitions, telling jokes, being very irreverent, which again I don't think is something that would happen now. And it kind of reflected that community feel that we were trying to get people to have. So I was see, I've got for some yeah. So if I was doing an illustration for myself, like I was doing a big spidery picture because I hate spiders, and I thought I'd do a picture. Yeah, that would go in, and I'd write around it. There was a regular cartoon strip that was in it that I illustrated as well, which basically had sort of a couple of archetypes of fighters and thieves and so on.
Yeah. But
there were articles as well. Again, mainly made, what can I write about? What have we got? I did an article about how the dwarves, how they would make a repeating artillery piece, gunpowder artillery piece, and then you'd have stats for Warhammer and RuneQuest and D&D, and so it was kind of a generic article and stuff. The articles about Lovecraft in Star Trek, because we were selling the Star Trek role-playing game at the time. And if you go back to original Star Trek, there are some very deliberate and obvious Lovecraft references from Star Trek writers like Robert Bloch, who literally references the old ones, and the door shapes in the place where the old ones were are the shapes that Lovecraft described. So quite subtle stuff, but great to get into. And then we had guest writers as well. So very proud to say we had Andy Chambers, the great Andy Chambers, good friend of mine, write his first ever rule, which was in Black Sun magazine, which was, I have no idea why there wasn't a kickoff rule in Blood Bowl to start with. There wasn't. So Andy went, we need a kickoff rule, wrote the kickoff rule, and very, very, very proud to have that as well. Yeah, so Black Sun was great, and because of that, I got invited to join the design studio, which at the time was in Enfield Chambers, and that was just. I started. Sorry, I'm not letting you get a word in.
That's all right. That's okay.
Just slithering now. I did warn you. So I went to Enfield Chambers, and I had a number of different jobs. The great thing, when I left, just as an aside, when I left Chewton Street, they went, well, you're off to the studio now. Take some stuff with you if you want. Like what? What? Anything. Fill the boot of your car. Take figures and games and stuff. I think they let people do that again.
Amazing. Yeah.
I've still got some of that stuff. Some of it's still shrink wrapped. But again, added to the unpainted figures pile. So I went to the studio and had an excellent variety of different jobs there. So I wasn't there as one particular thing. I started off working with Lindsay as a typesetter. because this was, again, back in the day when there was a typesetting machine that went on till Christmas. It was huge.
Right.
And it would, because again, pre-desktop publishing, pre-computers and so on. I mean, Macs and stuff were just coming in. Mike Brunton, brilliant, much missed Mike Brunton, and Graham Davis were using Macs down there. And literally, we had people gathered around Mike's computer because he would turn it on and he got it to go, "Good morning, Dr. Chandra." And of course, when he turned it off, "I'm losing my mind, Dave." In that sort of 2001, and it's like, this is magic. So this massive typesetting machine that was the length of the room, and I was working with that. People would come with us with copy they'd written, and we would then set that, with kerning and all the exciting old-fashioned.
Like physical. You're physically having to set the.
We're not physically. Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, we were able to do it on a screen, and right. it would then print it out. But it was luckily just putting individual bits of type in would have been just a nightmare.
But you're taking like an article and then some pictures, and you're pasting that together. Is that right?
Well, yes. So we're basically working out what space we have for the type to go onto a page,
right.
And then making sure that it fits that. It then gets printed out, and that then goes to the printer people and the design people, and then the printer people.
Right.
So at the time we had the great Chaz Elliott, again, good friend of mine, still working with him, thankfully. And he was in charge of all the design, and we had a great team of copy and paste of artists, finished artists, and they would sit there with big sheets covered in little blue lines where they had to fit things where
right.
the design had been sorted. Got some somewhere. Where are we? I mean, you start off with, and this is from I mean, again, probably can't really tell, but this is how something would be set out for an advert or whatever.
Right.
You get a picture, you photocopy it, you'd stick it down, you'd then decide that you were going to put logos on, plonk that there, and fiddle around with it, take it to the design people, and go. So you can see this is when we're still doing things like Advanced Hero Quest.
Sure.
Take it for approval, and then that would then go off and be done properly. So again, this is really old stuff, and it would end up as one of these, which was a bit of design work I did, because
right.
I moved from it. I was moving around. I was doing different stuff. I worked with Lindsay. Then I went to do design work, finished artist stuff, where we'd all stink of spray mount, because this, again, a lot of you cut your bit of text out that had been printed, spray it with spray mount, stick it on, wait for it to set, and things would be put together like that. And if you had a bit of a space, you'd put in a 40k logo or whatever.
Yeah.
Because this was about and indeed, to be fair, take a picture of a shop that's opening and plonk a Space Marine in, because that's as close as we were getting in the day to digital manipulation.
Sure.
So this was around the time of the first of Rogue Trader, the first 40k. I've still got here my studio copy with my name on of Warhammer Fantasy, which was my Bible, and is still bizarrely holding together quite well.
That's great condition. Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's not bad. I mean, I'm sure the sticker's going to ruin the value of it, but so we're producing all this stuff. 40k's just coming out. And again, I've got my my studio copy of a 40k here, which when it
Fantastic.
came out, we were all presented with our own personal copies,
Amazing.
which were all inscribed. And I'm very lucky to have a couple because John Blanche, who was again a good friend of mine, and I'll get into later, was my boss and my lodger, presented me with his copy as well, because John never holds on to the past.
Right.
He's a person who's constantly striving, constantly moving, and we got presented with these. And he got his signed by everybody at the studio, and he just went, yeah, you can have this if you want it. Well, thank you very much, John. So I've got a couple, which is quite nice.
Amazing.
So I was moving around doing different jobs. I was doing writing for White Dwarf at one point. Was copywriting for adverts, proofreading, doing adverts themselves, even doing sort of interviews and stuff for White Dwarf magazine. I was sent off to do shop openings. So when new shops were opening, I'd be given I'd have to order up a load of T-shirts for those particular shops with the name and date and stuff on, and then go out and give people T-shirts or give them sort of free product or whatever, and basically be the representative from the studio there.
Right.
It's kind of like I was doing bits. I'm never really brilliant at anything.
Right.
Kind of all over the place doing stuff, which gave me a really interesting a viewpoint into it. And I was again doing bits of design work as you've seen, and then some of the other stuff I was doing that I got into later. Some of the writing here. This is really old, and I can barely read it. So I'm just going to hold up what will undoubtedly just look like a white piece of paper.
Right.
But writing colour text for stuff. So this appears to be colour text. It's the second book of the Truth Revealed, chapter 13, verses 24 to 28. It is written that before the end of all things shall be the beginning of the end of all things, and this beginning will itself be fearsome to behold. I mean, it's kind of the Holy Handgrade of Antioch stuff. But it's some of the stuff that kind of that sort of fluff text that's ended up becoming I mean, obviously not this stuff itself, but the basis for that lore that everybody is taking, dreadfully seriously these days. Whereas back in the day, back in, original 40K, there was much more of a feeling of joy. There was much more of a feeling of being silly, putting references in. It's now, to my mind, quite serious, occasionally problematic. I know a lot of people love it, but I like the old Pete Nifton cartoons of basically referencing the Monty Python sequence where the guy is writing on the wall in Life of Brian, Romans go home. Right. And there's Space Marines go home, and a sort of punky guy painting it, and there's a couple of Space Marines standing behind him looking grumpy, where you're still pulling in that kind of cheeky pop culture stuff that made things fun, and I like games to have a sense of fun in them.
Yeah.
At the time, White Dwarf was doing Thrud, for instance.
Sure.
Thrud the Brave, Carl Critchlow, brilliant artist, and he was taking the mickey out of gaming stereotypes. I was very lucky. I had a Thrud script produced, and this is one of the original printouts from it. I've got the originals on my wall. But,
amazing.
I really wanted Thrud the Barbarian to be surrounded by flowers and like birds and bunnies and deer and stuff. And so had a baddie give Thrud a potion of niceness, which made him really nice. The gag then being that that there's an ambush set up for him, but because Thrud is so happy and he loves birds and trees and flowers and stuff, he literally throws his weapons away. I'll never need these again. And of course, each one he throws away kills one of the waiting assassins, which was great fun.
Yeah.
What else was I doing? It was naming figures.
Oh, yes.
Awesome. And again, kind of indicative of the way things were at the time that they aren't now. So figures had previously just had numbers and so on, and they decided it's much more fun if we give figures names. And I think Mike Brunton had done it for a bit. I think a couple of other people are good, but eventually it was like, well, your job now naming the figures. So I was having great fun with like the Imperial Guard, for instance. And I still see online in forums these days, people are going, "Hey guys, have you noticed that these Imperial Guard figures are all named after prog rock bands?" It's like, yeah. So there's members of Hawkwind, members of Rush, members of Marillion, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, stuff like that are all Trooper Peart, Trooper Brock or whatever. And another load that were named after the cast of the 1966 Batman. So, Adam West and so on. So there's all the people who played the Joker and the Riddler and all that.
Yeah.
I loved that. I loved just being able to go, what should we get? My favourite one was a skeleton lord in a chariot who was named Basil Rathbone, after the famous actor who played Sherlock Holmes, but obviously with a W in front of, so it's Rathbone, which for me was just, I probably I should have stopped.
It's terrific, yeah. I mean, it does seem like there was that. I don't know if punky sort of vibe is quite the right term, but they're almost like a less. They're very. A lot of energy and enthusiasm and, like you say, fun was sort of being mixed into all of this stuff. But it also sounds like it was really very busy, even just down to everyone doing multiple jobs and sort of trying to handle a lot of different things. I mean, what was the sort of balance between everyone coming in and having a great time with it, but then actually producing so much stuff?
There was an enormous, I think the enjoyment and the irreverence, and there was a lot of irreverence in it, came from not only the fact that the people who were there, like, kind of naturally irreverent, not irrelevant, irreverent, people like Hal, designer of Space Hulk and stuff. You've got Kev Adams, the other figures designers, Trish Alley and the Perrys and stuff. I mean, to be fair, John himself, was an outsider. I mean, John liked his bikes, he liked his, his music, he liked his image and stuff, and very. It's basically those chaotic people coming together, having to do a job. Because there were deadlines. It wasn't just messing about. Hey, let's do this. We've got a day to write the copy for this because it needs to go to the printers tomorrow. Mike Brunton, Graham Davis and stuff, right? We need some copy background now. And so you're pulling on everything that you can, using all of your resources and stuff. And if you can chuck in a Monty Python joke, then do. I mean, I got into quite a lot of trouble at one point for constantly referencing armadillos, because I love armadillos. Who doesn't? And so I was putting references to armadillos obviously in Black Sun, but also in White Dwarf. I got pulled into the office at one point. Stop talking about armadillos. and it was kind of serious, but at the same time, you have again just people making jokes. I mean, it was that kind of Thatcherism, was going. The political climate at the time was kind of anarchic, and that's just reflected in how the products were, the jokes in the products, and yeah, there was a lot of pressure though. I mean, Charlie Elliott, I know, was having quite a lot of trouble sometimes with just the amount of work that's coming in, and he's got to do it. He's got to do a perfect job every time. Put things through, get them out to the finished artists and stuff. Get those approved. If there's any changes need doing, and it's a constant turnaround of stuff because there is constantly stuff coming out, and of course, White Dwarf all the time as well. And that requires not only the people creating it, but then there's all the background stuff like the print buying, which the editing and stuff.
Sure.
I mean, I did a stint print buying for White Dwarf, and it was quite hectic and quite stressful. Right. I'm glad I didn't do it for that long. I much more enjoyed going down. I was doing playtesting with Hal, so I was playtesting the first Space Hulk that came out, and being paid to playtest games that are eventually going to come out, and you get your input into them, and you get paid for playing games. I mean, what's better than that? I mean, Space Hulk is still my, it's in my top 2 games of all time. I absolutely adore Space Hulk, and will play it to my dying day. But Dark Future, for instance, we were playing and talking through with Hal about how the actual mechanics of the game will work. Do you make the cars move on a track? Do you make the track move under the cars, which is slightly different? How do you work corners? Obviously there are space considerations on the table and so on, and then of course how are we going to do the cars, because Bryan had decided that he wanted sports cars rather than Mad Max looking cars, which sure. You've got this weird post-apocalypse aesthetic, but everybody's driving Porsches. Okay. But again, that was great fun, and I got to be in that as well, because one of the other things that was the staff were doing, the studio staff were doing, whilst everything else was going on, was people were being used as artist models. Right. So I used to go down quite a lot of the time and have photos taken. Phil Gallagher in his studio, Lewis, go down, get into a particular pose, hold this broom and pretend it's a sword, and look heroic or whatever. And so books like the original novels and stuff have a lot of black and white illustrations, and most of the guys with long flowing hair will be me. Although, funnily enough, one of the things, because John used me a lot. If you get his Rat Spike book, which sure. Had some text in as well, but there's quite a few photos where I go, oh, that's me. He also did stuff at home. So again, I don't know if you can see, this is quite a rarity. So because John did the original artwork for Sabat's History of a Time to Come, right? Which is a classic cover, and it has a sort of cross-legged me sitting arm stretch. I was so thin at the time. But this is the second one. It was actually unused. But the reason I've got this, I mean, he gave it to me as a gift. Tony Ackland is the main figure. Right. So it's based on Tony Ackland, the great artist. Bob Naismith, the figure designer, right. is down there. And for all my talk about having long flowing hair, that's me as a monk, with hardly any hair at all.
Amazing.
But yeah, so I mean, turning up as an artist models, and people were doing that all the time as well, which was just fabulous.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. So, I mean, you mentioned the sort of, well, first of all, actually, before I forget, I need to ask you, what was the other, you said that Space Hulk was in your top 2 games. So what was the other, that was the top 1 game?
Well, yeah, it's not a workshop game. Please forgive me.
That's okay.
It shows how old I am. It's an absolutely brilliant World War II card game, basically, by Avalon Hill. It's a game called Upfront, which is honestly, of all the games I've played, and I've played a lot of games, Upfront has mechanics that are the most like poetry in gaming. And I know that sounds, a bit purple and a bit effusive and stuff. I used to play it with Bill King, the author. We used to play in lunchtimes. Sadly, not in print anymore, long gone. But an absolutely beautiful game. You have cards representing individual men in 2 or 3 different squads. You play a movement card on each group. They move forward relative to their oppositional group. As you get closer, your firepower increases. You can then play firepower cards to do damage to them. There's no dice in it at all. It's all card based. There was at one point, if my house was on fire and I had to rescue one thing, it would have been my copy of Upfront. I've now changed that to my daughter, which I think is probably the right thing to do. But Upfront would be next.
Sure. Fantastic. I'm not familiar with that, but that sounds really, really interesting. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, I mean, there's another. I mean, these days there's a game called Undaunted, I think, which is kind of similar. I was talking with Jervis very sadly, we all met up again at Bryan Ansell's funeral. But talking about games, and I've got I'll have a bash at Undaunted with him. But up front, we've also got on our to play list, because it's a lovely game. It's a lovely game.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean,
sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask then, so obviously this period, this sort of unbridled creativity, all of this sort of stuff going on, and like you say, the deadlines were quite tough. I mean, this was when Bryan Ansell was in charge and sort of still driving a lot of that. I mean, what was he like as a boss, as somebody to work for?
Very, very motivated, very keen on he knew what he wanted, and that's which I guess could sometimes come across as him being a bit terse.
Right.
But I mean, he wrestled the thing with his, pretty much with his bare hands, from what it was, which was, another miniatures company, when there was a plethora of, I mean, obviously there still are loads of miniatures companies, but it was his focus that kind of pushed everybody else, and that you've got to do this because Bryan would let you push limits, but within limits, if you see.
Right.
In Black Sun, for instance, I was I would occasionally take the mickey out of him, but you go so far, and then you go, actually, you give the man his respect, give the man his due. You want to make sure that you're actually adhering to what he wants, because at the end of the day, he was a decent bloke, really decent bloke, and sadly missed.
Sure, but, of course, yeah. And then one of the roles you then moved into is working with John Blanche. I mean, you mentioned that he was your boss and your lodger at one point. I mean, what happened there? What was the sort of what situation took place there?
So I'd moved in. I'd basically John, along with Tony Ackland, were kind of the artistic foundation of Workshop and Citadel and the world. And you can see Tony's work throughout all of the original products, and John's as well. He was, John at this point was creating artwork, but also directing the way things went. This is what we want, and he needed an art assistant, and so he asked me to become his art assistant, or assistant to the art editor, I think was the actual job title at the time. There's so many. I keep looking at different copies of stuff. I was looking at, I've got armies and fantasy battle and stuff, and in each product I've got a different job title. So it's what are you doing today, Tim? No idea. Yes, but the most fun I had, the longest period I had, was working in the art part for John, and what he would get me to do. He would say, right, we've got these new figures. The figures would come down from the sculptors. They'd been cast up. They'd be covered in boot polish, basically, and then wiped off so they could be photographed properly, which is why you get the nice contrast in the old black and white and monocolour adverts. And then he'd say, right, we need a half-page picture of this particular figure. And my job basically would be to go, okay, we'll ask Pete Nifton, we'll ask Russ Nicholson, we'll ask, whatever artist was best suited. And then I would have to write the art brief, which involved getting the figures, involved getting all the iconography, because at this point the iconography was starting to become really important. So people like Dave Andrews and stuff would have iconography for the squats or whatever, and right, we'll photocopy that, and the art brief goes off saying we want this particular character in this particular pose, looking from left to right, firing his weapon with on the shoulder. We want this logo. Right. The orcs or the baddies, they need to be portrayed this way, that way. There'll be a flag in the background, and it was quite detailed, and so that we could then send it. Oh, and we will give you X amount of money, which was, not a lot. I mean, there were people like some of the best artists we had, like Pete Nifton, local guy, again, still good friend of mine. Was so good and so quick. We kind of ended up relying, and then because his turnaround was so quick, we didn't pay him as much as we should have done. I mean, the budgets weren't high, but there were some people who got and John Sibbick or somebody like that, or Ian Miller and stuff, would be commanding reasonably good figures. But some of the other guys were like, we'll do a half page and we'll give you 150 quid for it and stuff. And I dread to think that now. It's to be fair, things have all changed now because of the CGI and stuff. But we were getting. I was looking, and I found, again, probably just looks like pure white paper, but this is one of my original Games Workshop Art Commission briefs.
Right.
From the 12th of September 2012, Dark Future novels for Demon Download, the Dark Future book, and it gives quite details. So illustration number 1, the square at Fort Apache. So references US cavalry uniform and US cavalry cruisers. So I would put the reference that the pictures of the cars that we already had done. This is the main square at Fort Apache, an enclosed area used by the US RoadCav for vehicle maintenance, meetings and preparations for missions. It's quite large, each side being roughly the length of a football pitch. The walls surrounding it rise 3 stories, and for the main part they're concrete with a few recessed windows on the 2nd and 3rd floors. Blah, blah, blah. In the centre of the square is a group statue showing General Custer, Teddy Roosevelt and Richard Nixon shoulder to shoulder waving 6 guns. So you can see they were quite specific.
Yeah.
But then we've got, all troopers are wearing guns. Note this is a busy working base, and as such, the troopers being briefed will not be standing rigidly to attention, but some will have crossed arms, others will be standing hands on hips, attentive but not overly military. They are, however, stern and businesslike in demeanour. About 25% of the officers should be women.
Right.
So we were sending out very detailed briefs. It wasn't just a case of, hey guys, could you just draw some, one of these cars with a bloke standing next to it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was doing with the products I was working at, the Warhammer armies and Slaves to Darkness and so on. I'd be sending little briefs out, or indeed just going, to Dave Andrews, we need a load of shields and stuff to go across the bottom, and we could just leave him to get on with it because he knew what he was doing. And other people needed, certainly the external artists needed a bit more help and a bit more guidance and so on. So that was great fun. But at the same time, John needed somewhere to live, and came. I said, I've got a spare room at the time. You can stay with me if you want. Yeah, and he thought that was brilliant, because John basically wanted somewhere where he could sit, where he could paint, where he could just be left alone. And he created a load of his most classic paintings in what is now my daughter's room.
Right.
And no, it's great. We got on like a house on fire. He parked his. He had rather than having a company car, which he was entitled to, he had a company Triumph motorcycle, which was in my my garage, which leaked oil all over the floor because it was a Triumph. We had to get the local fire brigade to. I rang up and said, my mate's motorcycle has just poured oil all over my garage floor. What do you recommend I do to get rid of it? And shows how things changed. The guy at the station went, "Oh, great! It's all right. We'll get the engine out. The lads can use it as a training exercise." They've got this fire engine out and hosed down John's bike and hosed out the garage and stuff. Wouldn't happen these days. So yeah, he was creating loads of artwork, and we sort of rocked along. Went into work together. Did I mean, there's a sitcom in there somewhere, I'm sure. What was going on, and indeed, a little later on, we had the great and again much missed Wayne England joined us in this room, and Wayne was just a joy, absolute joy, and down to earth, fun, great artist. I mean, his character was kind of a bit not bombastic, but he was very, very open and forthright, and also, but his art, the subtlety and the beauty of his artwork, and that with John there as well was absolutely fantastic. And from my point of view, the great thing was they paid me in paintings. They paid the rent in artwork. So I mean, John loved the idea because John loves the sort of the bohemian aesthetic of, well, I'm not actually handing money over because that's gauche. I've got this painting here, and rather like a struggling French artist, I will pay you in a painting, for my board and lodging. So I ended up. I'm incredibly lucky to have some of John's classic paintings, the original Terminator box set, for instance, the front cover of Adeptus Titanicus, the lovely large yellow background, the original Imperial Guard plastic sprue box,
right.
show it, which is lovely. There's a chaos figure in the bottom left hand corner, with head smoke. It was supposed to be my head on it, but he was literally painting it the night before it had to go in, and he didn't have the time to finish it off. To be going all the way back to the original Regiments of Renown, the old Citadel one, the original Regiments of Renown artwork, and indeed a piece from his Prince and the Woodcutter book that he published previous even to that. I so lucky to have that. And Wayne also then decided that paying me in artwork was brilliant. which is great. And I've got other collections because other artists also gave me stuff. So Carl Critchlow gave me the originals of the Thread that I've talked about. Russ Nicholson gave me one of his lovely pieces. I've got the Dave Gallagher's Skaven picture from Warhammer Armies.
Amazing.
For instance, I'm just so for a long time I didn't dare put them up. But yeah, it's such a privilege to have them. But of course, the great thing is it just reminds me of some brilliant times, some and brilliant people. I've got Tony Ackland has given me some. Pete Nifton, who is just a joy. I mean, Pete's sort of cartoony style was Blood Bowl, for instance. It made Blood Bowl. Blood Bowl wouldn't work if it had hyper realistic artwork. I don't think, because the point of Blood Bowl is it's a parody, it's a pastiche. You literally can't get away from that. And Pete's input into it with his artwork, with his creations of the commentators, Jim and Bob, just the background jokes that he's got with corn flakes and that sort of thing, the puns and stuff that he puts into it. And I love that about Workshop. And I'm not in any way dissing what the company's doing now, because heaven knows they're incredibly successful. But it's much more, understandably so, corporate. It's much more formal, I suppose. But for me, the period of joy and glee was that kind of golden age.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like an incredible time. And you mentioned a little bit earlier just about like the release of Rogue Trader and 40k and how that sort of changed things. I mean, do you have any recollections of like what that was like at that time? Because I'm imagining that was a significant shift for Citadel at that point and Games Workshop.
Yeah, I mean, at the studio at the time, of course, you'd get a product and it would go out, and you wouldn't sort of sit back and go, I wonder how this has been received. You're on to the next one, because there's another product to do. Because the moment something comes out, of course, you then have to support the product. So there are more figures coming out. There's more artwork to commission for White Dwarf to back this up. This is when, or around the time when it stopped being the gaming hobby, where White Dwarf would have adverts for other shops, where White Dwarf would have articles about other games, other people's games. There was no D&D content anymore. If there were other people's games, they tended to be games that Workshop were doing imprints of, like Stormbringer and Paranoia and so on. But that again was coming to an end. I think I had the last review in White Dwarf of somebody else's games, which was second edition Paranoia.
Right.
And I love Paranoia. Again, it was one of the games that we used to play quite a lot, because it was fun and it was silly, and a great concept. I believe, and I paraphrase it, my review of it was, it's really good, but if you've got first edition Paranoia, it's probably not worth you buying a second. But after that, it stopped being, there was a kind of sea change. It stopped being the gaming hobby, and it became the Games Workshop hobby.
Right.
And it started, you don't mention other people, because we want people to just have Games Workshop as their focus. Again, entirely understandably, I'm not knocking it and stuff. There were people at the time who were going, oh, you're just becoming, elitist and exclusive and money grabbing or whatever. It's a company. That's, companies are there to produce, stuff. And if they started off back in the day importing D&D from the States and selling it, and then starting to create their own stuff, focus on your own stuff.
Mm.
So we'd end up then at things, having games days. I used to help compare Games Day 87, Games Day 88. There's a classic photo of me and Chaz Elliott dressed in Dark Future gear. Matt Cox had made proper Mad Max leather gear with shoulder pads and studs, and I was comparing it at the time, and there's a picture of me and Chaz sort of screaming at the camera, looking enormously youthful. I've no idea what happened to that leather gear, which sounds kinkier than I wanted it to. But the focus was then, coming into Dark. We do Dark Future. We promote 40k. We promote Warhammer Fantasy Battles, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so we didn't really get. There was no time for us to sit back and go. And to be fair, for a lot of people, no time to play the games because you're just producing them. And it's one of the things that, certainly in the early days, the idea that something would be play tested to death before it went out was just risible. You had people who knew what they were doing. Jervis, Rick, Andy knew what they were doing, and they write something and they go, well, I've played it in my head and there's ramifications and that'll do.
Right.
Whether that's the same these days, I don't know. Whether things get play tested more, I'd like to think so, but gamers always find a way to mess things up. so no matter how much you play test stuff, it doesn't make a lot of difference. And so to get back to your question, yes, it was a massive sea change. Everything was changing. It was becoming the Games Workshop hobby. And for that, we needed to focus on it. And that just meant product. And so it was one of those things where just no time. Next thing, do it, get on with it. And the pressure was terrible.
Right.
But again, it was fun. Maybe that's just nostalgia.
Well, the other very different career that I wanted to just briefly chat with you, Tim, about was that you've also for quite a long period been the official Robin Hood of Nottingham, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, you see, as you can tell, I've got no really marketable skills. So dressing up as with Chaz in the Dark Future gear and showing off is kind of all I've got. No, I loved. I used to do with the Asgard lot, way back in the day. We used to do Viking reenactment with the Norse Film and Pageant Society, and it was dressing up. Literally, again. Live role playing and reenactment has changed a lot. Back in the day, we were dressing up in pajama bottoms, wrapping fake or real rabbit skins round our legs and charging into battle. Looking about as authentic as I do now as a samurai. But from doing that, we got into live role play at Treasure Trap, which was the first live role play. Before it was called live action role play. It's LRP, not ARP. These up and coming youngsters, and the Asgard lot used to go down and do that, and I kind of enjoyed doing that quite a lot. When I left Workshop, I went for a brief period. I moved into retail, so I was working at the Nottingham shop and moving around doing other stuff. Nottingham shop had been Mad Tim's for a while, which was a strange sort of outlet for all the stuff that we couldn't sell. And bizarrely, although I wasn't the Tim that set it up, I kind of became the face of it because I was doing the adverts for it. So I was working at the Nottingham shop, but then left and got my own little shop, which was a hippie shop, jewelry, clothing stuff, which is where I met my wife Sal. And people from the Tales of Robin Hood, which was a bit like the Jorvik Viking Centre, but Robin Hood based, came out around the same time as the Kevin Costner movie Prince of Thieves came out. They would come into my shop to buy Celtic brooches and stuff. They found out I did sword fighting. They went, "Would you like to take part in medieval banquets?" I went, "Yeah, that'd be fun." Started off being a guard, the guard who gets beaten up all the time by the by the sheriff and Guy of Gisborne. About 6 months after I started, the guy who played Robin Hood had to leave, and they went to me, "Would you like to be Robin Hood?" So, duh, I said very eloquently, because who doesn't want to be Robin Hood? And so I've spent the last 34 years now playing Robin Hood at medieval banquets and stuff. Became Nottingham's official Robin Hood, which is a very strange job to have. Done lots of things, travelled the world, met the Queen and Will and Kate, and just weird stuff, and ended up marrying my maid Marion, who was Sal, who also did reenactment, and I needed a maid Marion. "Will you be my maid Marion?" Turned out to be the finest chat-up line of all time. And we've got a beautiful 10-year-old daughter now. Very sadly, we lost Sal to breast cancer very, very nearly 7 years ago, which was utterly dreadful. But she wanted me to carry on doing Robin Hood, so I've carried on doing it. And Scarlett's very keen as well, because she was literally saying this morning, "Daddy, you've got a job in 8 billion." I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Well, you're the only person who can say they're Nottingham's official Robin Hood." Fair point. I mean, I ought to stop at some point because I'm 60 now, but I do love doing it. It's great fun, and I would say it keeps me off the streets, but it really doesn't.
Amazing! What an amazing story. I mean, do you have like a sort of character of Robin Hood that you're playing in those? If you go to a banquet, if you go to an event, you're sort of embodying the role in an acting sense as well, I guess.
No, because I think that comes across as a bit false. I'm kind of like I have a bit more of a Robin Hood voice. "Greetings, my friends. It is I, Robin." But I mean, that's just projecting and being silly, and it gives you a freedom. It's lovely. I enjoy the sword fighting. I don't enjoy the archery quite as much, because who knew? I'm not the greatest archer in the land. But I am protected by the script. We had the European archery finals in Nottingham Market Square a couple of years ago, and we had Olympic and Paralympic archers, and just the best archers you could credit. And of course they got me into and to open the thing, we have Nottingham's official Robin Hood. Hey, Robin, would you like to take the first shot? Oh no, let's not do that. No, I said, I'm as everyone knows, I'm the finest archer in the land, so I should give everyone else a try. Otherwise, I would. Yeah, protected by the script sometimes.
Fantastic. Well, Tim, it's been a real joy chatting to you, and I really appreciate you finding the time to talk to me about some of that amazing history. So thank you so much.
My enormous pleasure.
Thank you so much, Tim, for taking the time to chat to me and for showing us so many of your awesome pieces of artwork that you've still got. They are incredible. It was a real joy to chat with Tim, and if you would like to find out more about his work as the official City of Nottingham Robin Hood, then you can check out his website linked in the description below. If you would like to support my work here on the channel, feel free to check out my Patreon. It's really the only way I'm able to keep doing this. But if you're not able to, that's absolutely fine. But a like, a share, a subscribe would be enormously appreciated as well. Thank you very much once again to Tim. Thank you for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.